Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be looking at a submission that you sent in, and it's called The Symbiotic Dance of Startups and Mammoths. Um, this is super interesting stuff. It's basically going to change the way you think about how the whole business landscape works,
Mm-hmm.
especially when it comes to those giant companies and all the little startups and how they actually kind of depend on each other. So this article argues that these huge companies,
Mm-hmm.
like the big established players, let's just call them mammoths for fun. They're not actually like crushing all the innovation out there. Instead, they might be super important for helping those cool new ideas from startups really take off.
Mm.
So basically, we're going to be looking at how this kind of unlikely partnership could be the secret sauce behind how the economy keeps moving forwards, you know?
Yeah.
And of course, I've got our expert here to help us break it all down.
Yeah. I'm excited to dive in it. It really is fascinating how we often think about startups and corporations as being at odds with each other, Like it's this big battle. But this article suggests that it's much more nuanced than that. It's more like this intricate dance where each partner relies on the other in ways we might not always see.
I love that analogy of the dance.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of this dance. The article starts off by talking about startups as disruptors.
Hmm.
For those of us who aren't deep in the business world, what exactly does that mean?
Well, the article defines startups as being really nimble, agile, daring. They can really zero in on these niche problems that those huge corporations might totally miss.
Mhm.
Think of it like you've got a speedboat zipping around a harbor, and
Yeah.
then you've got a giant tanker that has to move much more slowly and carefully.
Okay, I can see that. And the article gives some really cool examples of this disruption in action, like all the crazy stuff happening with AI,
Oh, absolutely.
with renewable energy solutions are popping up everywhere,
It's
and how those online platforms seem to change everything overnight.
Yeah, and that's what makes this whole discussion so thought-provoking. I mean, we all love to hear about those amazing innovations, but how do they actually go from just a cool idea to something that really changes the world?
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's where the article brings in the mammoths,
Yeah.
as this key ingredient for scaling those innovations.
Exactly. So you've got the startups with all these sparks of invention, but they often don't have the infrastructure to really get those ideas out there on a massive scale. But mammoths, they've got the resources, the market reach, and the stability to take a startup's game-changing idea and turn it into a global phenomenon.
Oh, I see. So it's not about one side winning and the other losing. It's more like they're both benefiting from this partnership, right?
Precisely. The article uses the term mutual aid to describe this relationship. Startups bring fresh ideas and energy to those massive companies, and that helps keep them competitive. In return, the mammoths provide the support that startups need to really reach their full potential.
It's like a win-win for everyone involved. And I love how the article uses some real-world examples to illustrate this,
Oh, yeah, they've got some great ones.
like how Google acquired Android.
Yeah, that's a classic example.
Google's resources basically transformed Android from this niche operating system into, the
Mhm.
global powerhouse it is today. I mean, it's on billions of devices.
Right.
It's incredible. And I was also thinking about how Tesla acquired Maxwell Technologies to boost their battery tech.
Yeah,
That move gave them access to all sorts of cutting-edge research and development,
totally.
which really pushed their electric vehicle progress forward even faster.
And we can't forget about Apple. They seem to be constantly integrating smaller AI startups to stay ahead of the game. It's like they're weaving AI into every aspect of their products these days.
Okay, so these examples really show how mammoths and startups can work together.
Yeah,
But the article also talks about this innovation loop with 4 distinct stages.
right.
Could you walk us through those stages?
Absolutely. So it all starts with what they call the innovation spark phase. This is where you've got tons of startups all competing and trying to create the next big thing. It's like a breeding ground for new ideas and disruptive technologies.
It's like that initial burst of energy.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
then comes the selection phase, right? Where some of those groundbreaking innovations start to stand out from the crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when those mammoths are paying close attention.
They're watching, taking notes, trying to figure out which ideas have the potential to be truly transformative.
Like talent scouts.
Totally.
And then what happens?
Well, that leads to the absorption phase. This is where the mammoths step in. They might acquire the startup outright or form some kind of strategic partnership.
Mhm.
The goal is to integrate those innovations into their existing structure and give them the resources they need to really take off.
So it's like they're adopting those promising innovations
Yeah, in a way.
and giving them a boost.
Exactly.
And then finally, we reach the evolution stage.
Right.
This is where things get really interesting. Because it's not just about the mammoth or the startup changing. It's about how their collaboration reshapes entire industries. Think about how smartphones totally revolutionized communication.
Yeah.
It created a whole new ecosystem for both mammoths and startups.
And that's the beauty of this loop. Those integrated innovations actually create space for even more startups to emerge, which kicks off the cycle all over again. It's this constant dance between creation, disruption, and evolution, fueled by both the agility of startups and the strength of those mammoths.
It's like this beautiful cyclical process. I love it. And the article goes on to highlight a specific example that I thought was really fascinating, the Rituals brand.
Hmm?
I'd love to get your take on this one. For our listeners who might not be familiar, Rituals is this really cool lifestyle brand. They focus on mindful living and well-being. And it was founded by Raymond Klusterman, who actually used to work at Unilever,
Oh,
which is
yeah.
a massive consumer goods company.
Huge. So
And
why do you think this example is so interesting? Well, the ritual story is particularly interesting because it shows how mammoths can actually nurture innovation within their own ecosystem,
yeah,
you know? So Unilever, even though it's this giant corporation, they didn't see rituals as a threat. Instead, they actually supported its growth, even though it could eventually lead to competition.
it's almost like a parent company giving its offspring the tools to eventually leave the nest and fly on their own.
Yeah, it's a great analogy.
But let's be real. We've all heard those stories about big corporations squashing the little guy. So is this symbiotic relationship always so harmonious?
Well, that's a really important point. While the article focuses on this idea of collaboration, it also acknowledges that even mammoths can stumble if they fail to adapt. Like they mention companies like ITT, which
Yeah.
basically crumbled under its own weight because
Yeah.
of
Oh,
overexpansion.
yeah, I remember hearing about that. And then there's Philips. They had to reinvent themselves like a million times over the years to stay ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
They went from making light bulbs to being a major player in healthcare technology.
Right.
It's a mammoth-sized pivot.
It is. And what about Stora Enso? They transitioned from a traditional paper company to a powerhouse in renewable materials. These examples all show that even giants can be vulnerable to what economists call creative destruction.
Ah, yes, creative destruction. The idea that innovation is constantly shaking things up,
Mm-hmm.
disrupting existing markets and creating new ones. It's kind of like a forest fire, clearing the way for new growth.
That's a great way to put it.
So that brings us to a bigger question. What does this whole dynamic between startups and mammoths mean for the economy as a whole?
Hmm. That's where things get really interesting.
Are we saying that instead of viewing large corporations as the enemy of innovation, they actually play a crucial role in keeping the entire ecosystem balanced?
That's the central argument of the article. It's urging us to move beyond these simplistic narratives, good versus evil, and really try to understand the complex interplay between startups, mammoths, and the forces of creative destruction.
So it's not about demonizing one side or the other. It's about understanding how they can coexist and even thrive together.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. I think we need a moment to process all of this. Then we'll come back and explore what this whole symbiotic dance means for you, the listener.
Sounds good.
All right, so we're back. And, we've been talking about this whole dance between startups and mammoths on this grand scale. But now let's get a little more personal. What does this dynamic actually mean for you, the listener, out there navigating this crazy modern economy?
Yeah, that's a great question. Whether you're an entrepreneur or an investor
Hmm,
or a policymaker or just someone trying to figure out how the business world works, understanding this relationship can be really insightful.
totally. Like, for example, if you're thinking about starting your own company, it's kind of encouraging to know that you don't necessarily have to conquer the world all by yourself. You might be able to work with some of those bigger players down the road. Exactly. And for those of you who work within a large corporation, it highlights the importance of staying open to innovation from outside the company, embracing partnerships with startups. That can really energize an organization and bring in fresh thinking.
Like even mammoths can learn some new dance moves, right?
You got it.
And for investors,
Yeah,
this model provides a whole new perspective on how to evaluate opportunities.
absolutely.
It's not just about trying to find the next unicorn startup.
Mm-hmm.
It's also about understanding how those startups might fit into the larger ecosystem.
It's about looking at the bigger picture.
So it's not just about picking winners and losers. It's about recognizing how interconnected the whole system is.
Exactly.
And for the everyday consumer, like all of us,
Yeah,
this relationship can lead to better products,
for sure.
more choices,
Mm-hmm.
and a faster pace of innovation overall.
Absolutely.
So this dance actually benefits all of us in very real ways. But the article goes even further, drawing some really interesting parallels between this model and broader societal cycles.
I thought that was fascinating.
So basically, they're saying that startups bring that dynamism and competition that drive progress,
Hmm.
while mammoths provide the stability and resources to scale those innovations and make a real impact.
Yeah, it's like they each have their own unique role to play.
So it's not just about business then. It's about how we approach progress and evolution as a society.
That's a really powerful idea.
And that brings us to the article's call to action.
Right.
They challenge readers to think about how they can actually help to support this balance between startups and mammoths.
And I love that they frame it as a challenge for everyone.
Yeah, that's a great point. So what are some practical things we can do? I mean, it feels like such a massive system. How can any one person actually make a difference?
Well, there are a few key things we can focus on. For starters, supporting policies that encourage startup growth and access to funding is crucial. We also need to push for ethical acquisition practices. Practices that respect the vision and culture of those smaller companies.
So it's not just about a mammoth swooping in and gobbling up a startup.
Right.
It's about integrating them in a way that preserves their innovative spirit.
Exactly.
And I think we can all contribute to a culture of collaboration
Hmm.
where both sides recognize the value they bring to the table.
For sure.
That can start with conversations,
Absolutely.
with challenging our own assumptions,
Hmm.
and with promoting understanding.
It's about recognizing that both competition and cooperation are essential for a thriving economy and for progress in general.
So as we wrap up this second part of our deep dive, I'm picturing this dance floor filled with startups and mammoths,
Mm.
all moving together in this complex and ever-changing choreography.
It's a beautiful image, and it really captures the dynamic nature of innovation.
Then maybe we could even find our own place on that dance floor. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, there's one more piece of the puzzle we need to look at. The article's call to action. We'll explore that in more detail and talk about what it means for you in the final part of our deep dive. Stay tuned. All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the symbiotic dance of startups and mammoths. And, we've spent this whole time talking about this fascinating relationship between startups and those massive companies, the ones we've been calling mammoths. But now it's time to get practical. The article wraps up with this really powerful call to action. And it's not just for CEOs or investors or anyone like that. It's for everyone.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting how they make it clear that this call to action isn't just for one specific group. It's for entrepreneurs, sure, but it's also for investors, policymakers, and even just everyday consumers like us. It's about realizing that we all have a role to play in shaping how innovation happens in the future.
That's a great point. So how can we actually do that? I mean, we've talked about how big this whole system is. So how can any one person actually make a difference?
Well, let's break it down a little. If you're an entrepreneur, maybe it's about thinking outside the box and considering how your startup could partner with a larger company down the line. You could use their resources and their experience while still staying true to your own vision and goals. It's not about selling out or anything like that. It's about finding a path that lets your innovation really grow and reach more people.
Right, you don't have to do everything alone.
Exactly.
And what about for the people who work within these huge companies? The mammoths.
Well, for them, maybe it's about speaking up and advocating for a more open approach to innovation,
Hmm.
one that's more collaborative. It's about seeking out those partnerships with startups that can bring in new energy and new ideas.
So even mammoths can benefit from working with those smaller, more agile companies.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that even companies that have been around for a long time can learn from the fresh perspectives that startups bring.
And what about investors?
Well, for investors, this model might challenge them to look beyond just the traditional ways of measuring success. So instead of just trying to find that one big unicorn startup, they might start thinking about how a certain startup could contribute to the overall health of the whole innovation ecosystem,
It's about playing the long game,
right?
not just focusing on quick profits,
Right.
but thinking about how to build a system where innovation can keep happening and growing.
Exactly.
But what about the rest of us? The people who aren't entrepreneurs or investors or working in these giant companies, does this apply to us too?
Well, the article makes it clear that even everyday consumers have a really important role to play.
Okay, so what can we do as consumers to support this whole dance between startups and mammoths?
Well, we can start by being more aware of where we spend our money and which companies we choose to support. We can look for companies that are really putting effort into innovation, both within their own company and through partnerships with startups. Basically, we can try to find those brands that are embracing this symbiotic relationship. and helping to create a more vibrant and dynamic economy.
I like that. So we're actually using our spending power to vote for the kind of future we want to see, one where collaboration and innovation are the driving forces.
Exactly.
It's actually pretty empowering to realize that we all have a part to play, even in small ways.
It really is. The future of innovation isn't set in stone. We're creating it through the choices we make every day, through the things we do and the things we buy. This whole deep dive has really opened my eyes to how interconnected everything is. We started out talking about the seemingly contradictory relationship between startups and these huge companies, and we ended up with a whole new way of looking at how innovation really happens.
Yeah, it's not just about disrupting things for the sake of disrupting things. It's about finding that balance between competition and collaboration,
Right.
between those exciting new ideas and the stability of those bigger players.
Exactly.
And it's about realizing that progress often comes from unexpected partnerships,
Mm,
from being willing to challenge what we think we know,
for sure.
and from really understanding this complex dance between these forces that seem like opposites.
Yeah.
So next time you see a headline about a big company buying a startup or a small company shaking things up in an industry, remember this whole dance that we've been talking about? It's happening all around us, shaping the world we live in.
And we're all a part of it.
We're not just watching it happen. We're
Right.
part of the dance.
Exactly.
Well, that's about it for this deep dive into the fascinating world of startups and mammoths. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep innovating.